Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Pan-Africa Vision, broadcasted to you from AFRIQUEMEDIA. I'm your host, Ambe Fokwa, who brings you through this program where we sit down and look at the breaking issues and review the current events and contemporary topics that have been passing through the news here on the African continent. To give you, of course, just like we call it, the Pan-Africa Vision, the African perspective, the black conscious perspective of what is going on in our continent in relation to this globalized world. Now, of course, in this particular edition of this program, we'll be looking at Zimbabwe, Egypt, Guinea, the DRC, as well as the ICC, as these are the major topics that have been dominating the news headlines. To, of course, give us some support, we've looked for a resource person and brought in Mr. Augustine Wendung, who is a very well-seasoned journalist on the continent, who's, of course, going to be giving us commentary and support and analysis. We're going to take our first topic, looking at Zimbabwe, but I do want to greet Mr. Augustine Wendung first. Augustine, welcome to Pan-Africa Vision, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fokwa. Honored to be here.
No, the pleasure is definitely ours. And
thank you very much.
Well,
indeed, I'm honored to be here.
Yes, thank you too. And we do want to start noting that with Zimbabwe, as we pointed out, would be our first topic. We have presidential elections set for Wednesday, July 31st. And we know that Mugabe's dominance has been the major headline in the news. Now, the question right now, as we're going to start to evolve this program, initiating looking at Robert Mugabe. This is an individual who came out of the independence era of Africa, we should say, fighting colonialism, became the president of Zimbabwe, and was a liberation hero for a very long time. But it's strange now, Mr. Augustine, that someone who has gone from a liberation hero has now been given the impression in the media of being a staunch dictator, in a sense not wanting to give the rights to the people that he himself did fight for the people to actually gain. We know Morgan Tsvangirai has listed several complaints about how the elections are being organized against this 31st. So I want to first put it to you. Do we still see Robert Mugabe as being a relevant politician? Should he still be campaigning? Should he still deserve to be president?
To be honest with you, Mr. Fokwa, when you want to put a question about Robert Mugabe being a relevant politician, I will say that to me the question is out of place, it's myopic, because because Robert Mugabe, there is a saying that a good actor leaves the stage when the applause is still loudest. Yes. But Robert Mugabe had outlived his political fortune. The days are gone when the Zimbabweans looked at Mugabe as a liberator. Mugabe, at one moment, had proven that he was anti-West or anti-Westerners, but of a sudden, he became even, the greatest threat to Zimbabweans themselves. Because when you preach a culture that you cannot practice, it is dangerous. Mugabe had accepted democratic principles,
yes, from the start,
democratic culture, and he cannot turn and practice dictatorship. And you will still see Mugabe as the man in the news, or the man in the making at all. Let us look after the liberation. What has been the living standard of the people of Zimbabwe?
That's a good question.
Under Robert Mugabe, close to 30 years rule. The common Zimbabwe will only rejoice and celebrate to see Mugabe not only leave the presidency, but completely toned down from the political arena.
Yes, sir.
Because it's costing more harm than good. He is merely insulting war leaders who have proven their worth and given their citizen pride. What has he done to the Zimbabweans?
Yes, sir. To answer that question, I want us now to go to this news footage, which does take us into the elections and the preparations for this July 31st with an analysis. We're going to see exactly how Zimbabweans are preparing for the elections and their impressions of their incumbent president.
Still determined to hold on to his job, President Robert Mugabe is back on the campaign trail in Zimbabwe, asking for one thing.
Vote, vote, vote.
He can still pull a crowd. It's 5 years since the last election here descended into chaos. Mr. Mugabe's opponents were beaten and terrorized. A political stalemate followed. Today, the tensions remain, as we discovered earlier this year in the capital Harare. Mr. Mugabe's supporters still quick with their boots. But in many ways, Zimbabwe is a different place now. Its economy no longer in free fall. Political violence rare.
The country's peaceful. Look around wherever you go. There's absolute virtual peace in this country, and tolerance, non-violence, and that is thanks to President Robert Mugabe. So they can't use the violence excuse anymore.
But look at all those new satellite dishes. Local state television remains openly loyal to Mr. Mugabe's ZANU-PF party. There is a hunger for a different perspective.
A very good evening, Zimbabwe.
This satellite channel has just begun broadcasting from abroad, determined to challenge the president's propaganda.
Zimbabwe is 33 years old and it does not have an independent television station. It's shocking. We're supposed to be living in a modern society where people should be allowed to have access to any media that they want.
But time is short. Early voting has already begun for next week's election. Much of the state's machinery remains under Mr. Mugabe's control. Fears of a rigged election are growing. Mr. Mugabe's rival for the presidency is already crying foul.
In the face of unfree and unfair conditions, I don't think the forthcoming election will be legitimate.
But his popularity has also been damaged by revelations about his personal life.
He promised to marry.
Former lovers appearing here in political adverts to discredit him.
And he says it's over.
And so Zimbabwe hurtles towards another election in which the loser seems unlikely to accept defeat.
And that is the election climate in Zimbabwe as we're waiting July 31st, 2013, when Zimbabwean citizens will go to the polls. So we see Morgan Tsvangirai on one side. On the other hand, we do see Robert Mugabe, and we see them clashing heads. Now, we do note that also in recent news evolutions, we know Morgan Tsvangirai has put together an opposition coalition, which is planning beyond all challenges to make sure that they do unseat Robert Mugabe. But he does have that strength, that rallying capacity, again, like you saw in that clip, Mr. Augustine. You see that the population still loves Mugabe. I don't know why, perhaps. Maybe you see in the past people still feel the ancient inspiration that he has inspired, being that figurehead of what we could say black supremacy in Zimbabwe, which brings us now to the next question I want to ask you. Do you really feel that Mugabe was right to oust the white population, which was controlling certain aspects of agriculture and mining and industry in the country, which actually, before the reign of Zimbabwe, had given it a relatively stable economy and infrastructure? After Robert Mugabe sent out the, should we say, Western colonialists who had established themselves in the country, we started to see a decline. And at one time, we heard about 300% inflation in the Zimbabwean dollar. Was he justified now? Understanding that, yes, African liberation is a valuable concept, but when it starts to challenge now the unity of globalization and then even destroys his nation's economy, is it a logical thing to do? Was Mugabe competent to have made that decision?
In as much as I love Africans to do the African way, in as much as I love to see Africans, masterminds and direct their own destiny. Yes. I wish to say that if we want to do it, but we go to do it in a complete dictatorial and autocratic manner, thereby bringing economic regression, yes, to our own continent, to our own states, we continue to fail. Mugabe ousted the colonialists. He had given a glimmer of hope to the people of Zimbabwe that a freedom fighter has come. A hero is born. Yes. But he will not be like Napoleon Bonaparte, who was the child of the revolution and at the same time, a betrayer of the revolution by making Zimbabwean live between poverty line is not justified, does not give Mugabe that, that honor, that privileged honor to be called the father of the liberation today. You ask a question, why is it that the popularity of Morgan Tsvangirai is like drilling? I want to tell you why. The power sharing government Morgan Tsvangirai entered with Robert Mugabe was indeed his Waterloo. That is why I will not accept any credible opposition, on the African continent, to go for power sharing when elections have been rigged or when a victory is stolen. Instead, be consistent. Like the dictator goes on. Because immediately Morgan Tsvangirai enter into power sharing with Robert Mugabe, the state machinery, which is very strong,
exactly,
in favor of Robert Mugabe,
yes, ZANU-PF,
did everything to weaken the charism, the enthusiasm, the vision of Morgan Tsvangirai. They framed him up, and his own skeletons were being gradually exposed. And today, from the campaigns, it speaks to itself. You would see Morgan Tsvangirai really standing, in the minority already. Though the people of Zimbabwe would have loved credible change. I don't believe that because Robert Mugabe was the freedom fighter, was the liberator, he ousted the whites and it kind of reinstated the black Zimbabwean to kind of run their own destiny, would have mean that Robert Mugabe should be a live president. That is, meanwhile, preaching a democratic culture. We just watch a citizen complaining that we are now living in a modern state, in a modern society where people should be free. People should be free to give their opinion.
Yes, that's also another issue.
There is no independent run media, no independent television who can, which could, balance the equation between Robert Mugabe and Morgan Tsvangirai.
And let's just try and cut there, because we have someone who's come in from Accra, Ghana. We want to take this caller who is coming in, who also wants to participate in the program. Then we'll continue with the next question. Let's see, Mr. Alan Roche, I think you are online. Okay, it seems he's not coming in immediately. But just like you were pointing out, I was realizing that,
Hello?
when you have the devil in the deep blue sea, there are a lot of people who might... Yes?
Hello?
Okay, Mr. Roche.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I just have I'm so impressed about that. Hello?
Yes, sir.
I'm
You're online.
About what you guys are doing. So, and I just called to show my appreciation, because I would like to see. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm using satellite, so I have some kind of interruption, but I'm really impressed about what you guys are doing. So I hope all the blacks will get to understand African independence, So we, the Africans, we can really fight for our own independence. I think I really like the fact of Mugabe wanting to make his country. I really like the fact that Mugabe set his country free from the whites, because I do believe that Africans themselves can develop themselves. We shouldn't wait for any white person to just get down or to develop Africa for us or something like that, because the white people also develop by their own. So we too can do it because we are also Africans. Yeah.
Yes, but at the same time that, of course, Africa should be liberated by Africans, knowing that the world is going towards integration and
like
individuals don't want to see skin color. Mugabe removing the Westerners who are in the country actually has led his nation now into economic depravity. That is what the question is. It's not about necessarily skin color, but whether a decision based on skin color, as Robert Mugabe acted, was in the interest of the economy of his country. Does that still qualify him to be this liberation hero of, should we say, Afrocentrism or the evolution of Pan-Africanism in Zimbabwe, being controlled by black Africans? Should he still be qualified when making a racially oriented decision led his country into bankruptcy?
Yeah, I think for that. Okay. Yeah, but at the same time, the opposition can also do something about it. But how sure the opposition can help the country or can make the country to go straight forward like how we want it to be? So that's the point. So which I think like we should just look both sides, because like now I can just see Mugabe's side is more improving because like his dream has become true and he's still building up new policies to make the economy of Zimbabwe, work better. So I think we should just give him a time for a certain point and see what will happen. But we can't just go forward and make quick decisions.
But can we give Mugabe more time? After 30 years, I mean, roughly, ailing president of roughly 89 years old, in a generation now where we see technology has changed, new mentalities have risen. I mean, we question whether Mugabe can even use a computer. Yes. So I mean, I know you're in Accra, Ghana, and the evolution of that particular country has gone further than most other African countries. You know that President Barack Obama of the United States, when he first made his first trip to Africa, it was to Ghana because Ghana has championed democracy and infrastructure. But looking at what Mugabe has done, when you want to compare two men, Kwame Nkrumah and Robert Mugabe of the same era, what Kwame Nkrumah left in his country, despite the coup d'etat that removed him, the infrastructure he left, the mentality, Mugabe has not been able to bring it in since the 30 years that he has reigned since independence. That is how I'm trying to weigh it, if we put all the cards on the table. Okay. It seems we have another caller who has come in now from Cameroon. I think we'll go ahead and take this caller as well. Yes, you're on Pan Africa Vision from AFRIQUEMEDIA. Hello.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Hello, caller from Cameroon.
Hello.
Yes, sir. You're on Pan Africa Vision. You're live, sir. Yes, welcome to the program. Yes, we're ready to take your commentary.
Thank you. First of all, congratulate what AFRIQUEMEDIA is doing in educating Africans. Talking about Mugabe, what I want to contribute in this point here is that it's not because of the 30 years Mugabe in power.
Yes, sir.
What is clear is that the decision that Mugabe took to steal the land from the whites, it is what is impacting their economy, and Mugabe is fighting hard to sustain it. And the Western powers are capable of doing anything in order to cripple Mugabe's rule. And we should understand this. If you look at what is happening in Cote d'Ivoire, what's happening in Equatorial Guinea now, you will discover that it's the same thing they want to do, so that the Equatorial Guineans should get up and then rebel against their president, despite the number of years as well. I think Obama has been there for almost 34 years. It is true that it's because of that petrol that the people also waxing high. But in Zimbabwe, they don't have the means maybe to support the economy. And this is just because the Western man is unhappy because of the decision he took, the unpopular decision. And the Zimbabweans were happy, fine. But he is unable to sustain the economy. and it's not really because it's forced. We should know that what the Western powers are doing in Africa now is to ensure that they push those who are like, I'll call them nationalists, up from that seat, and then replace with those who are ready to support them. What I'm afraid is that the man who is opposing Mugabe, if we're not careful, it might be maybe dancing in line with the Western power and support. And that is dangerous, and that's what we don't want in Africa today. If we have to turn up and say no to our president, let it be us. And we should not look for any support from the Western power, because that's where we will stay.
Yes, I'm getting your point, but let's contrast it with this.
Oh,
let me just interrupt you, because just last week we noticed that the whole world was praising the South African president, Nelson Mandela, for having achieved an integration and reconciliation policy with the whites, should we use that term, the Westerners that had, of course, colonized South Africa and established the political system, even after apartheid, which was a strong segregationist system. And you see South Africa is going forward, thriving. Couldn't Mugabe have also achieved this same reconciliation to have enshrined his name also in the annals of history as a black man who led liberation in Zimbabwe and also was able to build the economy in unity now with the whites that were there? Wouldn't that also have been a positive reality to have achieved?
Yes, let's look at the case of South Africa. I think Mandela was very proud that whoever is going to replace him is actually going to move in line with what South Africans actually stand for. But we should be very careful that maybe in Zimbabwe it wasn't going to be the case, because you can manipulate somebody else to say, okay, come on, you take over from Mugabe, but maybe with the support of the West. I know Mandela was very, very sure that his fight will continue even without him, and he was very proud to drop and give over power to the next person, because he was sure that we should look at what happened as people back to Equatorial Guinea. The gentleman who was campaigning equally with the opposition to Obiang Demba. Look at what was going to happen. He was supported by the West for wanting to put this guy out of power, and they knew what they were looking for. I'm not refusing. I'm actually very happy for the long stay of Mugabe and the deteriorating economy. But I'm afraid that we Africans, we should be very careful, because we will be used by the West and then pull our brothers out of power, and which at the end of the day, we will be serving them. We will not be serving our people.
Thank you very much, sir. And truly, Mr. Augustine, I really caught that point very concretely, because what we're starting to realize essentially is that seeing someone now like Morgan Tsvangirai, who is indirectly a particular favorite of the West, the fear that I'm getting from our caller is that if he does take over the country, granted we know that Robert Mugabe is someone who's been very in the forefront against what we should call Western capitalism. Because, you know, when democracy goes forward, Western capitalism comes after. And capitalism in itself is not the best economic strategy on the face of the planet, because in a country like Zimbabwe with already a weakened economy, the gap between the haves and the have-nots can actually become wider. And we could see that maybe Tsvangirai's own opposition and his own clique of politicians who take authority could become wealthier, and instead the poor could get even worse. So let me ask you, yes, okay. So let me ask this question now. Would Morgan Tsvangirai make a better president? Just briefly, because we also want to take another caller.
Mr. Fokwa, I don't think that we can justify dictatorship or a long-serving presidency to the opposition leader being a pro-Westerner. I don't want to. You can never evaluate somebody who has never been there. How can they be evaluating Morgan Tsvangirai when he has not taken to the presidency? It is wrong for for us Africans start thinking that we have to be independent by isolating ourselves from the global earth. No, we want to ask today, are the Zimbabwe people better than when the whites were there?
Okay, now let's take over this question to Mr. Alan Roche, who is calling in from South Africa. Mr. Roche, I'm not sure if you got that question.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Yes, sir, Mr. Roche. Welcome, of course, once again to Pan-Africa Vision. Now, the question we just had on the table, we're looking at Morgan Tsvangirai.
I would just like to contribute by saying...
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to contribute by saying, although Mugabe has overstayed his power in Zimbabwe, he still remains a liberation fighter, and we cannot, on any account, compare him to Nelson Mandela because they had two visions that were totally different. I had the privilege to meet with Tsvangirai on many occasions. He has something that makes him a leader, but not a statesman.
Could you elaborate on that just a little bit? Because I wanted to throw that question to you. Do you think Morgan Tsvangirai would make a good president?
Sorry?
Yes, I wanted to throw that to you based on the statement that you just said. Meeting Morgan Tsvangirai and assessing his character as a leader but not a statesman, do you see him as a good president for Zimbabwe? Should he really have that right to take the elections win and sit in the chair?
I do not see him as, I do not see Tsvangirai as a president.
You don't see him as a better alternative then? Okay. Let's have your explanation. Yes.
He is not presidentiable. He has a lot of limits because while discussing with Tsvangirai about human rights issue in Zimbabwe, his point of view is more like the absence of Western people in Zimbabwe is the only thing that is destroying Zimbabwe, which is not true. Mugabe has tried a lot. The only mistake that Mugabe has done is not for overstaying in power, but is for ruling out all the white farmers without creating a transition. He should have allowed the white people to prepare the African people to the agricultural system that was existing. So that is the only problem that he did.
And actually, that's what I really
Otherwise, the real problem between Mugabe and the Western people is not even about those white people. It's not in the interest of Zimbabwe that the Western people are paralyzing Zimbabwe.
Yes, okay, that's where Mr. Alan Roche has concluded. Now, we want to, of course, move away now from that topic. I think we've squared Zimbabwe away because what we're understanding is that the issue of a president being in the chair long enough does not necessarily constitute the value of what they are as a person, but what they actually have given to the country. That's how we look at presidents. What do they leave behind as their legacy, and not necessarily things that they've done. The decisions they do make, however, are, of course, going to contribute. Yes, Mr.
Yes, I think that is the bottom line. The bottom line is, yes, 30 years in power. What is the living standard? What is the economy of Zimbabwe today? And if somebody is still saying so, can that person quote that country that has seen long-serving president with economic buoyancy? When you are preaching a culture, you have to practice that culture. Robert Mugabe had accepted democratic culture, which go with transition, which go with change. And if the change is not coming, I believe that it is at the detriment of the Zimbabwe people.
Good, and that's why I want to cut you, because when we want to start looking at this next idea, the detriment of the people. We saw Egypt now. Because we know that Egypt is definitely inside our review. And we have to accept that the Egyptians didn't even give President Mohamed Morsi up to 1 year. They give him exactly 1 year, maybe 363 or 364 days to run his mandate. And then they came out into the streets and called for his immediate removal. And the military went forward and sacked him. So this is how we want to start evolving this question now. It has been 25 days roughly now since President Mohamed Morsi was taken into custody by the military and deposed as the head of the state. Now, was the military justified?
I want to say that the Egyptians are still suffering, the decade rule of Hosni Mubarak, because they have never learned democratic change. All they knew had been dictatorship, military rule. And when Mohamed Morsi came to power, the Egyptians expected to see, to see that vision, that freedom, that democratic culture they had yearned for being practical. But I want to say that President Morsi, it was rather unfortunate that the reforms he started brought about a kind of a belief in the Egyptians that, the Mubarak era was like showing its ugly head, though in a civilian government, because the military only hearkened to the call, to the popular call
of the people.
The squares were filled not by the military, they were filled by the Egyptians, telling Mohamed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, no, this type of laws you are igniting is not correct. You need to listen to the voice of the people. Because the voice of the people is the voice of God. What is happening today in Egypt is the popular voice.
Yes, it's a popular uprising.
Yes, the popular uprising. So the military, to salvage a situation, only needed to step in and arrest the situation.
Good.
But what I sharply disagree with the military, the transitional government in Egypt now, is the continuously detention of Mohamed Morsi. They would have let him go, call Egyptians to the dialogue table, let them talk the destiny of their country. Because if the military will persist in power in Egypt, I am afraid.
Good, and that's why I want to stop you, because we need to look at this clip, and then we're going to get this point out clearly, because that's what it's starting to look like.
Correct.
Like the military, anytime they want to, will just stand up and challenge. So we could be shocked. This is what the Muslim Brotherhood is saying. In a year's time, if the military is not content with the leader and the people rise up again, they just sack the president again. So we want to look at the rise and fall of President Mohamed Morsi, and then we'll come back and elaborate more on just whether we're facing a situation that is genuinely leading to civilian rule or a military junta.
Cheers erupted from hundreds of thousands celebrating in Tahrir Square as the commander of Egypt's army announced President Mohamed Morsi was no longer in power.
The Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court will declare before the court the early presidential election, where the Justice of the Constitutional Court will run the state's affairs unit in the interim period until the new president is elected.
He also said the state's Islamic-backed constitution would be suspended pending review. It all happened after a tension-filled 24 hours as a military-imposed deadline neared for President Morsi to respond to the demands of the people in the streets. In a defiant speech to the nation last night, Morsi vehemently defended his position as the elected leader of the country.
We now have a reference. We now have legitimacy with our own will, an elected president, a constitution voted by the people, and we are working according to this legitimacy. The revolution of January 25th and the achievement of its goals completely, the price tag for protecting it is my life, my own life. I want to take care of all of your lives.
When morning came, Egyptians awoke to reports that the military had taken over the Al-Aram newspaper, and armored vehicles surrounded the state television headquarters as officers were stationed in corridors and the newsroom. Minutes before the military deadline passed, Morsi's office did release a statement backing a coalition government as a means to resolve the conflict. But the last-ditch effort was largely ignored by opposition political, religious, and youth leaders, who met instead with the military chiefs to plan a way forward, and security officials reportedly imposed travel bans on Morsi and his top allies. Liberal opposition leader Mohammed el-Baradei said that the Arab Spring-inspired revolution of 2011 had been relaunched by today's announcement of an army-sponsored roadmap. In his announcement tonight, the commander of Egypt's army said it's time to bring the country together.
The Egyptian armored forces appeal to the Egyptian people with all its spectrum to maintain peaceful demonstration, steer away from violence, which will bring about further tension and shedding the blood of the innocent. And the armed forces warn that it will stand up firmly in cooperation with the Interior Ministry, security personnel firmly and strictly to any act deviating from peacefulness under the rule of law based on its patriotic and historic responsibility.
And that is the situation in Egypt, and it has been evolving since that fateful July 3rd. Everyone continues to be glued to those major headlines. Mohamed Morsi in detention, and the military saying, of course, just like you were pointing out, Augustine, is that they acted on the impulse of the population. But this is how I want to put this next question forward to you, and our viewers out there, of course, our telephone lines are open. Now, we start to realize that there is a process for the removal of a president. Just like before we saw that video clip to look at that news, I put out this idea that what we're seeing now is the military rising up again. They rose up, they removed Hosni Mubarak. They've risen up again, they've removed Mohamed Morsi. They've not followed the proper process that in a civilian state where there is true democracy, there's a process of impeachment which should be followed before a president is removed. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is complaining that it's a coup d'etat because of this basis. And that's the question I want to put on the table now. Is this a coup d'etat? Do you share the same view?
I don't think that is a coup d'etat. I don't think it's a coup d'etat because this was a popular uprising by the Egyptian people. But the interim government in Egypt, as of now, would have done something to a kind of bring Mohamed Morsi, the deposed president, to freedom, so that together they can come to the table, because it was unconstitutional. I just want to tell you, because you talked about...
But is the way he's been removed also constitutional?
Yes, that is why you talked about real democracy. That is why I am telling you that the Egyptians, you know, what is happening in Egypt, it comes, I mean, it springs from the Arab, you know.
There's the Arab Spring of 2011.
The Arab Spring, yes, that you saw it from the Tunisians,
yes, to Algeria,
to the Algerians, and you know, to the Egyptians. So these are states that had never experienced democratic culture, and for them to go through it demands some time, it demands some education, and it demands two strong institutions to actually put in place a democratic culture.
Yes, and we recognize this. We recognize this, but let me interrupt you, because that's what Mohamed Morsi tried to do when the military had already given him the ultimatum that he was going to be removed. He sat down and said, okay, I recognize that everything has not been rosy. Democracy will take some time to be implemented. Let's come to the table now and dialogue the situation. The other parties, they refused to dialogue, saying that this man must go. So he made a fair attempt, and the military has still gone ahead and removed him.
The fact is that when the people start yearning and start complaining, it is, I mean, the leader has to be pragmatic to the plight of the people. It's until when Mohamed Morsi discovered that things were going out of hand, you know. So, but what actually should be done now, because actually Mohamed Morsi is no longer in power. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Egyptian people, because there are two camps in Egypt.
Yes.
You have the anti and the pro-Morsi.
Yes, let me cut you there because we
Yeah.
have a caller who needs to come in. Just hold that thought.
Okay.
Yes, we have a caller from Douala, Cameroon. You are on Pan Africa Vision. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fokwa. I'm coming back again to...
Yes, you're welcome. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you've analyzed this very clearly. There is no real democratic, country in the world today that will support what happened in Egypt.
Right.
To say it wasn't coup d'etat. It is very...
Oh, your line is breaking up. Okay, it seems that caller has gone offline. But the idea is, what I'm trying to put out is that as we'll start to transition to this next topic on Equatorial Guinea,
Yeah.
if we're starting to allow this president be set that in democracy, in what should be true democracy, the will of the people for the people, and the popular opinion being the valuable role for the military now to come forward and state and back to the point of removing a president, if this starts to tumult beyond Egypt, beyond Tunisia, to other African countries, because when we start to look at the situation in Equatorial Guinea, you see the same problems over elections. When it comes to elections on the African continent, we always have this crisis coming up. If we say now that it's okay for a military to back the will of the people in a popular uprising and protest to remove a president, then no country on the face of this planet is going to be stable. We had America with the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy San Francisco issue. If the military decided to back Americans and go into the streets and remove Barack Obama or a subsequent president, then it would set an even more dangerous precedent for the world. So that's what I'm trying to look at. If we take this situation of Egypt and keep it in context, knowing the military of Guinea too, once also did control the country under Moussa Dadis Camara, and then followed through a provisional government which transitioned the country to a democratic rule from 2008 to 2010. Can military intervention to act as a guardian of the integrity of the state be justified to be democratic? That is the question I want to put out, and I want to also throw this back to our caller, or Mr. Alain Roche, who's also standing online. Should this president in African politics, where should this president, where in African politics we see the military involving now, like we saw in Guinea, be justifiable? Is it laudable for a military to come forward?
No. In a democratic culture, the military has nothing as intervention. We want to see the constitution, the laws of the land respected.
Then let me ask you this now. Then why did you justify that what is happening in Egypt is not a coup?
That is why I want to see my own point of view in this matter is that I want to see that this is the consequences of dictatorial regimes that go for decades in power. The Egyptians are not suffering the few months of Morsi in power. They are still suffering the syndrome of Mubarak era.
I get your point.
That is the problem in Egypt. The problem in Egypt is not that the military were interested in a coup d'etat. The military had not believed that the Egyptian people had actually gone to a civilian role. They were still having the venom of power in them from the Mubarak long presidency. So what African countries, what African leaders should do is to accept democratic culture and to know that the real culture of democracy, which is government of the people, by the people, and for the people, once the people choose their leader, democratically, those in power should take their exits, should bow out honorably. In fact, you quoted the example of, the unblemished Nelson Mandela of South Africa, the political icon,
yes, and that should be the
of
example
our
for African
generation.
Yes.
He is the African continental giant that lives on, even bedridden. He has no second.
That's amazing.
I want to ask that if Nelson Mandela had not bowed out, we would have had the history or the legacy of the Thabo Mbekis. Talk less of the Jacob Zumas.
Yes.
Oh, come on. Can you go back to the Kwame Nkrumahs of Ghana? From then you have the Roaring.
Yes.
From the Roarings you have the John Kufuor.
Yes, the Secretariats.
The Secretaries, the John Kufuor. You have the Atta Mills. May he so rest in peace. And today the Ghanaians are enjoying democratic culture that match with economic buoyancy.
Yes.
What are we talking here about? When leaders come and they are power drunk and they never ever have the vision of living power with the flimsy excuse and the pretext that they are defending the territorial integrity or the economy of the people. What economy? When the people are living in abject poverty and plenary, where a little few will be in affluence.
And that is the trouble,
That is
we're
the
looking
trouble.
at
If
the suffering of the
Africans
people.
want to defend, to be real Pan-Africanists, let them go to the visions of the Kwame Nkrumahs. Let them forget about the Kwame Nkrumahs of yesteryears. Let them go into the philosophy and the democratic appetite of Nelson Mandela of South Africa.
Yes, sir. Now, let me throw out this next question because I want us to transition. Just like you're saying, it's about going back to the ideology and letting the people go back to the ideology.
Yes.
Now, but faced with the political situation, like what we're looking now in Guinea-Conakry, yes, we have this problem in which the opposition has decided to take a stand and stay away from the elections. Now, specifically from what we understood is that the current president, Alpha Conde, he himself had been envisioning to hold the elections on a particular date. It was supposed to have been June 30th, but that date was not possible, granted that inside the country, the infrastructure was not there. So unfortunately now, the opposition, seeing that this was not going to be a possibility inside the country, as well as noting that there was the assassination of an opposition leader, Mr. Selou Deline Diallo, in his home, they've not participated in the elections which were supposed to have set, which were just never came forward. The people have been protesting. There have been several deaths ongoing in the country. Now, as opposed to understanding the ideologies of these icons, cultural icons of Pan-Africanism, we have to use pragmatic politics, and the opposition has been boycotting. But at the same time, it's been creating a situation in the country of violence. Should we instead encourage this tactic? Granted that the ideology is not represented by the leaders in place now. The opposition has to use a particular method and strategy. Is abstaining from politics, like you also just saw in Egypt. The Brotherhood sees opposition parties abstaining from dialoguing with the ousted President Morsi, and we see protests are only continuing. In Equatorial Guinea, we see, of course, abstention again from the parliamentary elections, which were supposed to come. Violence continues. Is abstention proper in African politics?
Any credible opposition, a credible opposition.
Yes, and we need you to be brief because I need to take
a credible
caller
opposition
online.
should not go. They should not adopt this tragedy of boycott. Boycott has never helped because when you boycott, you mean that you are going to take a tragedy that will not favor peace.
Good. Now let's take Mr. Alan Roche. I want Mr. Alan Roche to come in and comment on this topic so that we can move on to start looking at a very serious issue in the DRC. Mr. Alan Roche.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Mr. Ross, you are online, sir. We were just looking at the crisis situation in Guinea-Conakry and relating it to what's going on in Egypt. Like we see there, the opposition parties are not coming to the table to dialogue, and it's stimulating instead violence in the country. So we're asking you, how do you see the situation? What are the alternatives opposition parties have when their backs are against the wall, when faced with dictatorship?
Anger on the streets of Conakry. Sights like these have become commonplace in recent days. The people here are part of the opposition to the government of President Alpha Condé. They want him out, and they've lost patience with the political process. The police have used tear gas and water cannon to try to dampen down the discontent. And one senior officer says the protesters are doing real damage to the local community.
The people leaving Bambeto, they're going over the barriers, then they throw stones, even though they're with their families. There are children and elderly people around. They're traumatized.
But opposition supporters reject that entirely. They blame the government for causing the unrest, and they say the security forces have killed people.
We have now buried 30 of our children. We are on the streets because we are tired of the killing of our children. We are Guineans. We are not going to run away. We have the right to march, and we are going to continue our protests. You only die once.
More than half of the 10 million people in this country survive on less than $1 a day, meaning access to things like petrol at more than $1.30 per litre is for the very few. The literacy rate here is one of the lowest in the world, and with such stark social problems, some analysts say Guinea's future is bleak.
70% of Guinea's population is under 35 years. If you do not give them hope that they can have a normal life, a job that gives them dignity, you're creating desperation. And when you create desperation, it will trickle down to the streets.
Guinea's parliament has not met since 2008, and since then the country has been ruled successively by the military and then President Condé. The opposition sees the elections as a vehicle for ousting his government, and to use the vast natural resources Guinea possesses for the benefit of all. The election is scheduled to go ahead next month.
And that is the situation in Guinea-Conakry in the West African coast. We see violence moving from a military junta, a president, of course, who is not representing all of the ethnic groups in the country, ethnicities in the country. We point out that he himself, he's of the Malinke ethnic group. There are also several others, the Guers, there's also the Peul. And from what the complaint is behind the opposition parties is that they fear that he's not going to allow equal representation in the upcoming parliament. And with so many other factors, protests are raging on, and the elections which would let this whole country move forward democratically are just not being held. Now, Mr. Alan Roche, we know you are online, and I want to ask you, assessing that situation in Guinea, what are your own comments and feedback? Mr. Roche, are you online?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I wanted to speak about the case of Egypt by saying I'm not in support of military coup, but I'm so happy to see that the government of Mohamed Morsi is in just brought down, because what Mohamed Morsi was about to bring to Egypt was going to set a kind of precedent in Egypt, because in their history they have been a laic state, not an Islamic state. So even though the Muslim Brotherhood managed to take the power via a normal democratic election, it was unfair that they tried to transform a laic country into an Islamic state, because that was like violating the rights of the minorities. Yeah.
Well, that's very true.
That brought more damage to Egyptian people than the actual state of things.
Yes, because we know Egypt has Jews. There are also Coptic Christians as well. And then even in Islam, there's several different factions and beliefs as opposed to the staunch desire for Sharia law. So when that issue did come up, of course, we saw him not representing the will of the people.
Yes.
Well, that is
what
very true.
I told you, Mr. Foucault, that if the Egyptians came to the street, it was simply because Mohamed Morsi started igniting laws that were going to set a precedent which is going to make Egypt an Islamic state, not a secular state, which is not correct. In Egypt, Egypt is not a typical Arab state. In Egypt, you have Christians. The Coptic Christians are there. And how can you come to say this is a uniquely an Islamic state? Good. That was where Mohammed Morsi had it all wrong. Yes.
Those are some of the issues actually with Islam as a religion when interpreted extremely staunchly. Now, of course, as time is running out, we want to move away from that Egypt topic, looking at also passing through DRC to end at our fourth major topic. This is where we're going to start rounding up this edition of Pan-Africa Vision. Now, this week, it was hot in the news. A June 2013 report from the United Nations has come forward to clearly implicate Rwanda and its president Paul Kagame in the support of the M23, the M23 movement rebels in eastern DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, that has been terrorizing that region of the African continent. We're hearing numbers of up to 60,000 people and even up to 3 million people have been displaced since last year, with thousands others, of course, butchered and murdered in this ongoing process. Now, this is something that will tie us to this concept of the ICC indirectly, because if Paul Kagame now is coming up on these accusations of having a military relationship with the M23, we're told specifically in this report that the Rwandan military gives mercenaries to the M23 as well as logistics and support. Now, we also see that Paul Kagame is a very close friend of the U.S. and the U.K., and we also noted that the U.S. Secretary of the State Department came forward and also supported this accusation. Now we're looking at Paul Kagame in the spotlight now. He's in a position to go to the ICC. We see Uhuru Kenyatta, 2007 Kenya presidential elections, ICC warrant. We see Omar al-Bashir, ICC warrant. Alassane Ouattara, we spoke of Ivory Coast, ICC warrant. Paul Kagame, it's like he's being covered up.
That is Laurent Gbagbo.
Yes, that is it. That is it, Laurent Gbagbo.
I think that is unfortunate what is happening on the African continent, that you will see Paul Kagame supporting the rebels to be massacring people in a neighboring country of the Democratic Republic of Congo, precisely in Goma. What has been ongoing there, the instability, the manslaughter. This is uncalled for. Paul Kagame is doing all this for which interest? And you will call him a friend to the West? No, I think that nothing is much more than human life.
Yes.
The human life, the blood that has been spared in Goma, thousands of African blood killed for nothing.
Now, Mr. Augustine, let me add this question there, because you asked this question.
Yes.
Why could Paul Kagame be involved in sponsoring the M23 rebels? And this is what we were to take from the report. Now, some people say that there's a possibility that he's backing the M23 to spite the DRC, who supported the rebel Hutu group, the FDLR. And as well, now, this is where the politics behind it starts to become, should I say, conspiratorial to a certain degree, because we see the U.S. and the U.K. backing Paul Kagame. They say that he has good humanitarian and poverty relief strategies, but DRC, very vast, is rich with minerals.
Rich in minerals.
And that is what there's now the accusation.
Gold mines.
Good.
Is it not because of all this?
That is the question.
That is definitely just that, because DR Congo is rich in natural resources. Let's destabilize them and and rid them of what is there.
Yes, because indirectly there are statements that say that as the M23 is fighting to seize Goma once again, they've been seizing regions in eastern DRC that are actually near Rwanda.
Why has the international community watching? Why are they not taking a pragmatic action to stop this? This bloodshed, this unnecessary bloodshed.
No, but let me add this point. There are UN peacekeepers on the ground there. But amidst this situation, it seems like there's a ruse. Now, as time is running out, let's take Mr. Alain Roche, who will come in, and then we'll round up here in the studio. Mr. Roche, we're looking now at the issue of Rwanda. Even though DRC is in the major headlines behind it, we should even say it's Rwanda that should be more under focused. We need your commentary, of course, there, sir, to help us conclude this edition.
Thank you. Rwanda has a lot of interest in DRC.
Yes.
The first reason is that the Rwandan soldiers who supported the Kabila's seniors movement to overthrow Mobutu Sese Seko. They had kind of agreement that the Rwandan soldiers were supposed to be part of the DRC army. Unfortunately, the patriotism is something a call from within. So when Kabila's father took over the power, he decided to chase away his right hand, who was the Colonel Paul Kabarebe from Rwanda, who did everything for him. So when he chased him, he started a war. So because of that war, Rwanda, who was supporting Kabila movement with the help of America and South Africa, could not just lay down the arms and decide to watch, because their interest is mostly in the mines that are exactly at the border with Rwanda. So as long as the gold, the diamond, and all those things, the coltan will still be there in the East Congo, Rwanda will still be involved. And geostrategically, America will still be involved on the side of Rwanda.
Yes, and that is how we do see the situation there in Rwanda. And unfortunately, time definitely has run out. But we see a ploy starting to emerge in the situation. Unfortunately, the U.S. is coming forward and accusing Rwanda of backing the DRC. But from all indications, possibly, it's just a ruse to back up a real intrigue, which has been the problem right from when we started talking with Zimbabwe. Mineral interest inside the country. That's what we're going to continue to leave on the floor and have you ruminate in your house as we do end this edition of Pan-Africa Vision. What are Western interests in Africa? We Africans need to exploit those interests, of course, and balance up. Without saying so much once again, we remain, of course, AFRIQUEMEDIA. I've been Ambe Fokwe here, presenting to you Pan-Africa Vision, giving you your vision of Africa for this week. And next week, same time, same channel, we will, of course, bring you more information and analysis. We were joined today by Mr. Augustine Wendung, who's been giving us resource support. Mr. Augustine, thank you, sir.
It's been an honor. It's been my pride and honor to be here, Mr. Fokwa.
And everyone, of course, do have a
whenever
good day.
it's possible, I'll be there.
Definitely. Thank you, sir. Everyone have a good day.
Okay.